policy-based organization. You're good. So just real quick to say again, my name is Eric Anderson. I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of Restore Justice. A little bit about Restore Justice real quick. We're a policy-based organization. We focus mainly on the long-term and over-incarceration of children and young adults. We also work in other areas. We have a returning citizen support network. We have a family support network that's called CRIC, the Communities and Relatives of Illinois' Incarcerated Citizens. We have some other programs that we work with, and one of the things that we're really proud of are these self-advocacy trainings. We really enjoy being able to bring this information to everybody, and we're super glad to see you. A little bit about myself personally. I am system impacted. I'm a former juvenile lifer. I was sentenced to life without parole for a crime I committed when I was 15 years old. I am an apprentice at Restore Justice in the FLAT program, which stands for the Futures Leaders Apprenticeship Program. Was actually started by our current executive director, Mr. Wendell Robinson, as a way to help people like myself who had served very long sentences to make the transition back to society. We also have our communications manager, Lizzie, here. So I'll just give her a second to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lizzie Lewandowski. As Eric said, I am the communications manager here. And we can take a second and let the other members of the RG team introduce themselves. I'll hand it over to Julie.
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Julie Anderson. I am the outreach director at Restore Justice. Eric is actually my son. I put that in the chat. After he's been home a year, and so after 27 and a half years, and I'm super excited, as I said, to arm family members and loved ones with a tool that's going to help them advocate for those inside. So welcome. Should I pass it?
Please.
Okay, I think I saw Wendell on the call, so I'm going to pass it to him.
Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm Wendell Robinson. I am the executive director here at Restore Justice. I, too, am a former juvenile lifer. Welcome, welcome, and welcome. And I'm going to pass it to Mike.
Hi, everyone. I'm a current intern with Restore Justice, finishing my Master's of Social Work at the Crown Family School of Social Work. Happy to be here and help out. I will pass it to Chris in a second, but we'll be kind of managing the chat. When we have the Q&A session come up, we'll just be taking your questions as they come in. So as I say that, I'm going to pass to Chris.
Hi, Chris. Also interned with U Chicago School of Social Work. Finishing up, and we'll be with the chat. So it's good to see everyone again. I think, is it all of the RJ team?
I think so. So thank you. If we could put the housekeeping slide up real quick, Lizzie.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Wait, is there? I don't know that
I'm sorry. That's probably on me.
There it is.
But anyway,
highlights here. Remember to stay on mute just to keep the background noise down since we are recording, so that anyone who's here can revisit it, and so that anyone who couldn't join us tonight can learn as well. And please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves and pop questions in there as we go. There'll be plenty of time for questions, but if you're thinking about it, put it in the chat.
Awesome. So thank you. And I think we'll give Isra and Chaclyn an opportunity to introduce themselves and get us started.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Isra. I am involved both with the Children and Family Justice Center and at the Invisible Institute. I do a lot of our outreach work, sort of at both places, and have spent time building community, doing journalism work, but also like working on some cases with folks at the Children and Family Justice Center, who many of you know. And I'll pass it to Chaclyn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Chaclyn I'm the legal director with a nonprofit journalism organization, the Invisible Institute. And I do a lot of public records work. The beginning I'll say is I mostly work on police department records. So we've done some research thinking about state and Department of Corrections and other types of agencies here. But if you have questions, definitely please ask them. And also we'll give our email addresses so we can follow up with more specific questions you might have. But yeah, thanks for having us, for joining. I'm really excited to get to talk to everyone.
Thank you both so much for being here. We're like incredibly thrilled and feel very lucky to have you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen since I know that you guys have a set of slides to share. So both of you should be able to screen share, but let me know if you run into any issues.
Well, Chaclyn, do you want to do it? Should I do it? I can do it.
Yeah, if you have it up, go for it.
Okay, cool. I also have this fear of what will open up. Whether my
Let's
whole
see.
top is gonna show up. Okay. So
I-
I'm not really loading on mine.
I have it.
Awesome.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Cool. I was thinking, do you want to walk through it, Isra? We'll start with it, and I'll click for you.
Sounds good.
Let's see.
Cool.
How's
So
that?
yeah, that's perfect. So like we mentioned, my name's Isra. It's my colleague Chaclyn. I'm part of the Children and Family Justice Center. We're also from the Invisible Institute, and we were tapped by Julie and co to do some FOIA self-advocacy work training. So we'll be talking through a bit of that. Yeah, so just like an overview of what we're going to go through. We're primarily going to start with what sorts of information you can request and what a FOIA request is. Most of you should have also received a 1.5 pager that we wrote up to kind of walk through this, as well as like provide a little template for FOIA requests. So if you want to open that up, maybe that'll be helpful. And from there, we're going to talk through about like where you can find the information you're looking for. So like what departments / like where to find out who the FOIA officer is for the specific information you're trying to find. And then we'll go through writing a FOIA based on like some template FOIAs that Chaclyn and I have filed. And that'll be like very interactive. It would be great if folks were like practicing along with us or like looking at the types of requests they may want to do. And then we really want to leave room for us to provide tips, but also just walk through questions people may have and specific FOIA requests they may want to file, because we find that like that's the most useful hands-on way to learn about FOIA requests. Yeah. So okay, so primarily so I guess to start, it's good to think about what sort of information you want to request. And 3 main things to walk away with are the type of language you use is, while it's important, it's also shouldn't be a barrier to filing a FOIA request, because it's also on them to help decipher what you're trying to ask for and kind of support you through that. So any sort of plain language, you don't have to like be an attorney to file a FOIA request. Really, anyone can do it. But more so, there's certain specifics that you can try to add to a FOIA request that can help and increase the likelihood of them getting back to you with the documents sooner rather than later. Though even then, like there's a lot of ways to work on that. And I don't know, Chaclyn, do you want to talk about no duty to create, yes duty to extract?
Yeah, so this one is primarily around databases and data requests, but it also can come into play with documents sometimes. They don't have, the state or the government agency does not have a duty to create new records for you. So if you ask for some type of information and they don't already have that information tracked, they're going to say, we don't have it. And so at that point, you might need to be a little more creative around what you're asking for, or you might need to call back the FOIA officer and say, you know, this is the information I wanted. Does it exist in any documents you already have? Because that's part of the law. And it is part of Illinois law that they have to help you understand what you're asking for. So that's why you're allowed to use plain language. You don't have to know the name of the documents. You don't have to know the name of the database you're querying, asking for. It is the FOIA officer's job to get you public information. And as part of that job, you can talk to them and ask for their help in understanding what does exist. Are they always going to help you? No. Are they always going to know? Sometimes no. But you do have the right to ask and have that conversation. So.
Yeah, and then exceptions or exemptions for why you may not get your request answered. They're kind of specific, but I feel like primarily and the most important one is private and personal information. So that's sometimes used to deny a FOIA request if you're asking for like a public official's like social security number type thing. That's what I usually imagine, but oftentimes like that will be said, but in reality, like there's still some wiggle room around getting it. That's just one reason they could deny it, as well as things such as like notes. So not like the official agenda meeting notes for a public meeting, but notes that go into it behind the scenes that are sort of part of the decision-making process, but aren't really like final stamped, if that makes sense. Yeah, and then the next slide is kind of going to get into the question someone asked in the comments, but maybe after that we can see if like we haven't answered that question.
Yeah, so the deliberative process notes are a way of protecting the ability of officials to like argue with each other and try to reach the right outcome. But as Isra said, like if there are official notes or records from that, you do get those. Those are public information. But sometimes it's just the notes from like internal meetings. But you should always, if they say it's deliberative, you should always ask why, to make sure that they're not hiding something behind that word. Yeah. I'm just looking at the chat. Yeah, I'll get through some. Case dockets, you can ask for. Case dockets are also published by your court. So I think we'll talk a little bit about trying to find this information before you ask a FOIA officer or as you ask them.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
this
Isra.
this slide is really helpful, and we'll share the slides for this as well. But before you file a FOIA request, it's useful to check if the information has already been made public. And these are some sites you can go to see if that has happened. So some people have either already filed these FOIA requests because they're in positions like you, or many journalists have created websites like ours, where they already make documents public via FOIA request or lawsuits. So that's what the open data projects are. And alongside that, a lot of agencies have started to upload some public documents as well, potentially in anticipation of people requesting them. So things like police department directives are available online, IDEOC directives, annual reports, and a whole range of other things. So it's useful to kind of try to search around to see if a document already exists online. And if you're confused about that, we get a lot of inquiries regarding that in our email. So like both of us said, our emails will be provided in the end, but if you do have a question about whether you can FOIA for something or whether it's already public, definitely reach out to us. And then this Google Tips link is really useful to learn maybe the best way to search on Google for something. So if you're looking for something and you find that just like writing it the way that seems natural to you isn't generating it, there's some ways to add like quotations into that so that it searches for what you actually want, even though that's not what how you actually wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah, I find the Google one is often one of the most valuable one of the most valuable searches because there's a way to search like a specific website. So if you go to the IDOC website, there's a way in Google to search for keywords just on that website. And that sometimes will pull up documents that you had a hard time clicking through all the links to find or things like that. Definitely hit that Google's tips page and practice around with that. I found a ton of stuff that way. Yeah, and even like once you start researching what you're interested in, you start seeing different types of documents and different language on different types of documents. This will all help you track down what you're eventually looking for. And it will help a FOIA understand you better.
Yeah, so trying to get to the bottom of where the information is that you're trying to get and who the FOIA officer is, there's a few ways to go about it. So sometimes it'll be somewhere you don't expect it to be. So it's smart to check multiple different departments. And we'll get into that with like some examples that do that as well. But also trying to find all and any email addresses for the people / agencies you're trying to request. So even if you can't find the FOIA email for your very specific request, if you find someone's email, they more than likely can route you to the FOIA officer who can help you with that. And in smaller towns, there sometimes isn't an email provided. So best practice is just email everyone who you see, because I feel like they're in the network, they'll route you to the right person. And also they are our public officials. And yeah, I don't know, Jason, if you want to add to the other two.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Actually.
Yeah. Same. So this is like a robust list of examples of things you could FOIA request for. And I think it's kind of exciting to look at it because there's so many things under the moon that you don't even think of that could be interesting. And I think it's also useful to see the array of different things you can get, whether it's like training documents or staffing information or any sort of like public meeting request, specifically like down to like the smallest town, tiniest meeting, and up to like very specific city council things if they're not already made public. So this is a big list, and I think in the next slide, I've kind of narrowed it down to ones that maybe would be relevant to folks in this call. So yeah, I think like all of them are really interesting. Things like contracts between IDOC and private vendors, whether it's like the phone companies or the food vendors, a lot of those can be like, you can get the whole process of like how they got the bid and what they presented and what services they're supposed to provide. IDOC and CPD directives, which we mentioned before, that can be really useful. And you can also find historic directives. So if there's a new directive out for like 2024, you can request like directives in that specific genre going back to whenever you want. Reports, evaluations, suggestions, things that come out of like task forces, most of the time those are public, like the official recommendations from it. But if you find that they're not, you can ask about that. We primarily work with police documents, so arrest reports, use of force reports, truly anything an officer would have to file can be FOIA'd for. And court records, etc. So these are a lot of things. And then how to write the FOIA. So maybe before we get into that, we can answer the question someone asked, which is, are we able to request interview reports during an investigation of an incarcerated loved one, as well as police reports reported against an incarcerated loved one? Chaclyn?
So the answer I'll say off the bat is always yes, you are allowed to request, always. The question of whether they're going to give them to you or not is like the second question, but I just tell in every training, if you have a question, if you want something, ask for it. Sometimes, like, even though they're not supposed to give you stuff, they will send it to you and you just might get lucky. So like, don't cut yourself off from those requests. Definitely do. The answer to that is just going to depend on some of internal process for how they record those interviews, whether anything has been filed in the court case already that would make it public, whether the sentencing process is complete. So depending on what type of appeal. So I would say there's definitely different ways you can access that information, and some of it is going to be private and some is going to be public. Transcripts are sometimes tricky. The courts are not subject to FOIA technically, although they do have a public information officer who can help you with these things. They're just not required under law to follow the same process that the sheriffs and the police departments are required to follow, if that makes sense, in the prisons. Sorry, it's not a fantastic answer, but a lot of FOIA stuff, it's not going to be a fantastic yes or no. It's definitely going to be a process, but that's just an encouragement. You can, once you see the template or you like find an email, it's so simple to send an email and just see what you get back. It's definitely worth doing. Yeah. Anything else, Isra? Go ahead.
Other question asks about reports against officers in the IDOC if incarcerated people have filed against them. So like, yeah, we talked about this when we were putting together this slideshow. I think you're specifically asking about like grievances against IDOC officers, but I don't know if Julie, you could clarify that a little.
I know that, officers frequently report against incarcerated people if in fact incarcerated people maybe complain about specific officers repeatedly, if that's something that you could FOIA to find out, oh, Officer Brown is, got 7 complaints against him or something, although they're all unfounded or whatever I don't know what the terminology they use would be, but.
So yes, you can FOIA for them. When we looked up grievances, one of the hardest part is that they have a counselor for the first step, and many of you might be more familiar with this process than me, so feel free to like jump in if you have advice. But because they have a counselor for the first step, they're protecting themselves from like a layer of documentation. So if a person goes and tries to file a complaint against an officer, a grievance, that counselor is going to intake it verbally and then attempt to mediate it verbally. So you're having a difficult time accessing documents. It's possible that they have like a tracking system that just says like someone filed a complaint against this officer, and all complaints against law enforcement officers in the state of Illinois are public information. So if they're not, they might tell you like it doesn't exist, we don't have it. But if they're telling you we have the complaint and are not releasing it, that's not Illinois law. But a lot of departments, the IDOC is better at it because they're bigger. A lot of smaller police departments will fight you on it, even though legally they are incorrect. We've had to fight really hard in places like Champaign and Joliet, and we have a lawsuit right now in Rockford because they're just like violating the law. So you're entitled to it. It still might be hard. But that's what I remember about the grievance procedure, is people have things to add to it.
Yeah, I would just jump in real quick as a person who filed a lot of grievances. That yes, that is the process, and that is definitely a layer for the bureaucracy to take hold and just dismiss everything and not keep track of it, for sure. Once they are filed, once you do file a written grievance, the form, I mean, I don't know if I'm sharing with you a thing you already know, but that it is numbered and tracked, and you can follow it after that. But getting to that step in the process is definitely a hurdle for people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So that means you could FOIA how many grievances filed, not necessarily the responses to them, right? Because
Yeah,
supposedly
that's a great question. You're talking about FOIAing a data set, and data sets used to have different rules than documents, but at this point they're treated almost the same. If you ask for a data set and they tell you, they love to say this, well, we don't have the results. So if you say like, how many number of complaints, they say, well, we don't produce a result about how many number of complaints, we just have a database. That's not acceptable. They have to go and query their database for that information. And then you can request it in the form that they keep it in. Because early on with us, what they love to do was print out an Excel file and then like scan it back into PDF format and then send us the PDFs of the spreadsheet, which makes it impossible to like run analysis on huge sets of spreadsheets. You can now request that they send it to you in the format they keep it. So if you're looking for a spreadsheet of a limited amount of data, they do have to go into their system and pull that data for you. And one thing you can FOIA for is often what I kind of refer to as the meta FOIA, which is like, you can ask what their database has. So there are ways to figure it out. So like if you read an annual report of the IDOC and they have statistics in there, you can guess that they keep a database of those types of information. But you can just ask them like for a list of types of information that they keep in a database. You're essentially asking for like the titles of the columns, right? Or rows. So you're definitely allowed to ask for that. And then the other thing about the database is that you can generally assume if they have a form, it corresponds to a database. And so early on when we were looking for Chicago Police Department data, I took their complaint record form and formulated a data request based on the fields that were on that form. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, another way is also like we've requested the contracts between the companies that are actually like the companies that IDOC or for us like police departments have contracted with to maintain the data, or like they've basically given these police departments or whatever government entity the tool in which they house different like reports. And so you can get the contract between the two and sort of read between the lines to see like what technological capabilities they've given them. So if they say that like you have like search and find capability or something like that, it may not be said like that, but that sort of function. And they say like, oh, we can't search and find for like this specific officer or this specific incident or this type of incident. And you're like, well, actually, it says that you should be able to do that. That's another way to figure it out. It's just like kind of nitty gritty. Another question that was asked is, can you request government and law enforcement training documents, process and procedures? And definitely, yes, you can get and request like training manuals, what sorts of like updated training, if IDOC says that they're doing a certain training for officers inside, you can find out like what that actually looks like. And you basically also like formatted it really well in your question of just like training documents, process and procedures, that sort of language, plus like who and when would really be like all you have to write in a FOIA request. The next one was, can you FOIA performance reviews of employees in the state's attorney's office or follow up on complaints submitted to the state's attorney's office? I'm gonna lob that to Chaclyn.
I don't know the answer to that directly, but it's a really interesting question. Sometimes, so some pieces of personnel files are private and sometimes performance reviews are in there. The question of like the like ongoing nature of like a complaint or something, you can request the status, like a status update. Where is this at? Who is my investigator? Has this been handled? Has it been referred? You can that stuff you can definitely request. Performance evaluations. I don't think I've never asked for those. I don't know if you've seen them, Isra, or if anyone else on the call has. Again, oh, sorry.
I haven't, but worth trying. Can you get discovery in FOIA processes?
Typically not, because those are court files and they're gonna be shared confidentially between the prosecutor will provide discovery to the defense attorney, but they'll sign away that it's confidential. It's pretty rare to get discovery documents. Their best route for getting discovery is to be talking to the attorney. Not on the state side, but on the other side.
What about, can you request all correspondence, emails, calls, meetings between state's attorney, their employees, law enforcement, as it pertains to a particular case?
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically we go for emails, but you can also ask for calendars of public officials. They're gonna want a really narrow request on that because when you ask for a set of emails, they're gonna search a keyword and get gazillions of emails. So you're gonna want to ask for some specific keywords, like we request all emails between this attorney and this attorney that reference this. And they might tell you some of these are deliberative processes, some of these are going to be confidential attorney notes, some are things like that, but it's definitely worth asking. They might come back to you and say, can you specify a time period, or can you add more keywords to limit this search? But I've done emails a lot and they can be really interesting and revealing. Cool.
Oh,
So I have to tell you guys that my laptop is dying. I'm sorry if you see me. I got stuck out in Hoffman Estates and now I'm like bumming Wi-Fi off of Starbucks and I'm like a little bit chaos. So when my laptop dies, I'm gonna join from my phone. But I hope, Israel, will you drop the PowerPoint in the chat or the Google Slides in the chat so that way if I abandon you, you guys can still see the slides. I'm so sorry.
yeah, I'm in class, but we're gonna get through this and it's gonna be great. So
Yeah.
Okay, so I dropped it whenever Chaclyn laptop
Let's
died.
find this here.
And I think
So
someone else.
this is the template for the basic FOIA or for a FOIA. You want to include that recipient. You want to include the date of your request. And then you can see from this request that it's pretty specific about the names of the officers and who was arrested and what date, supplementary reports. We put in here like the record number. Isra made this request, so, but this is a pretty formal request and it's written after a good amount of like preparation and knowing what you want. This is good because it might shoot through faster. because they're so specific and they can give you what you need. But also, here's a request I just made, just like 2 weeks ago or whatever, and it has the same information, but it's super short. I didn't put the recipient because I was emailing the email. I didn't put the date because it's on my email. My phone number here. And this was a request I made just to test because I was kind of looking into stuff for this call. I was interested in the policies about when individuals in custody get out on like day release, basically. And I had looked at the policy and seen when it had been implemented. And I asked for all the historical versions. And that way I could see like at a specific point in time. So if someone you know was let out on a day release, you want to know what the policies were on that day. And that matters a lot. And directives, old directives are hard to find. They don't usually publish them. So that request went through and I got them. So in the slide, you'll be able to see the directives.
So I just want to ask, is this, if we were going to ask for something from the DOC, is that the address, the DOC FOIA request at illinois.gov? Awesome. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, the forensic reports, the false confessions, things like this, I would ask for them. There's not a lot of success on those. A lot of times, especially if something hasn't gone to trial, it's like pled out, so it hasn't been published anywhere, it hasn't been handed out. A lot of times so for the detectives and those false confessions, I would be asking for complaint records against those detectives. And you can ask for them specifically about the detective from the department they worked at. And those you should be able to get. Oh, I've never seen the ARDC request before. The forensic reports, like I said before, those are going to be hard. All the investigative files in a case are going to be hard. I suggest you ask. Some of it might have been finished. Something police departments love to do is like mark it as open still. So, it like happened 15 years ago, but there's like an appeal somewhere and the police department's like, this is an open investigation. We can't release the files. They love to do that. So you might hit that barrier real quick. But again, definitely ask. I don't know at all about the ARDC complaints.
I also don't
like
know,
they
but I
should.
imagine like maybe, like I think you should definitely ask, but I think maybe their response would be that judicial information is not FOIA-able.
Yeah. I can look that up though. Chris, you said, are you charged for transport media? No, you should not be charged. And that's because the same thing in my request, I'm an individual. It's not for commercial use. I just request all the fees be waived. Sometimes they can charge you like a reasonable fee for say like an autopsy report or something like that. I think we've paid $30 in the past for autopsy reports, but typically if you call and ask for them to waive the fees, they do. You have a right to most fees being waived. But they do like to charge like big newspapers and stuff for like printing costs and CDs and things like that.
And querying their database, what does that mean and what is that asking them to do?
That's just so for the Chicago Police Department, the database contains like all the officers and then a list of complaints against all the officers, and then each complaint has a list of the different allegations within it. Like, it was an illegal search and then he roughed me up and he called me a slur during it. These are different allegations. And then you have the complainant race and gender and age. You have the officer's race and gender and age. So those questions can be answered from them giving you a snapshot of the database. Because you obviously can't get their entire like gazillions database, but you can ask for the specific type of information within it. Is that making a little bit more sense? You can hit me up also about database questions. I'm happy to answer more specific ones. I just put my email in the chat. So you guys have it.
I actually think the next slide after this might be more useful, which is like what the responses are that you can get. You want to walk through it, Chaclyn?
Yeah. Just what it says. If they don't respond, if they give you something you didn't ask for, which they do sometimes, they give you part of a document, but not all of it. If they redact stuff that you don't think should be redacted, they don't even give you a reason for denial. All of those are denials. All of those you can call, you can email back and argue a little bit with. There is a formal appeal process through the public access counselor at the state's attorney's office. Yeah, so there is a formal process for the appeal. Yeah, the attorney general, I'm sorry, did I just say state's attorney? And once they deny you and you have gone through maybe the process that you feel comfortable with, talking to the FOIA officer, arguing a little bit, trying to find out, does it go to another department, those sorts of things. If they still aren't giving you something, this is the place where you send your appeal. This is the person who you ask to look at it. You can alternatively file a lawsuit. It's like way harder and more complicated. The public access counselor deals with these all the time, and we've had pretty good success either winning and getting the information or finding out exactly why the denial is correct. And then that gives us like a little trail to follow on other types of documents. So they have a pretty good guide. I linked it here. Definitely suggest taking advantage of it. And then I put in an example of an appeal we wrote. Again, pretty formal, not necessary for you to do this formally. This is a request I wanted on a specific officer, and I put his badge number in there, and then it turned out he had a different badge number at some point, so they only gave me the complaints when he had one. And I was like, I obviously wanted all of these. Like, is the department messing with me right now? Like, it's pretty clear. So we ended up getting his files. Yeah.
Another question that came up is, can they deny a FOIA request based on how it will be used if it's for a civil lawsuit versus personal use, as an example?
No, the only difference is personal to commercial. So they'll charge and sometimes like deny requests from commercial entities who want to profit off of it, but as individuals, no. Even if you want to use it in a lawsuit, you don't have to say you're going to do that.
And how long does it usually take to receive a response?
They have to write to you within 5 days, and then they are allowed to ask for a 5-day extension, business days. After that 5-day extension, so they basically get 10 days almost automatically. After that 5-day extension is up, they are supposed to have responded to you by then. They have to by law. They don't always. If they don't respond to you, then they waive some of the denials. So they're no longer allowed to tell you that your request is unduly burdensome. And this is actually how we released hundreds of thousands of documents about the Chicago Police Department, which is that someone made a request for every document and they didn't respond. So they could not say that the request was unduly burdensome. So they had to produce them. There was a big lawsuit. So it's a that timeline can be a big deal, and the timeline will matter if you end up appealing it to the public access counselor. They do not like to watch a government ignore you. So keep track of like when you filed, when they responded, what they said to you. It will help later.
Yeah, another sort of avenue we've used is asking the FOIA officer for a phone call to clarify your request, or if you have a question about like why your request is getting denied, or if they forgot about it, or any question really. You can try, and sometimes they won't respond, but sometimes they might. And in that conversation, you can ask things like, do these documents really exist? Or like whether there are other documents. If your FOIA request is confusing, or if they could send you more information about why your FOIA request was denied via email. Usually I've had it happen where I've had a phone conversation and the request will be adjusted based on the phone conversation. And then they'll send me an email basically saying what the phone call was, and adjusting the request. And I find that it can be useful to also like open the door if that's an option with the FOIA officer, especially because then you can work with them to try to get the documents that you're trying to get. And it doesn't necessarily have to be antagonistic. But yeah, that's all the slides. Do you ask for the phone call via the email address? Yes. So you can usually be like, I would like to clarify some things, like, is it possible to hop on the phone? Or if they feel comfortable giving you a call, you can give your phone number and they'll follow up via that avenue if they want to. But
I would add. Can you hear me?
yeah.
I'm now on my phone and my laptop, so if I lose you, I'm still here. So once you have a phone call, write everything down, and then it's really good practice to email the officer. And it's really good practice to email the officer and say, in our phone call, we talked about this. This was the reason you gave me, because what you're basically doing is just creating a paper trail for later. You can send it to the public access counselor if you're going to appeal your denial. And so that's one way of making sure to hold FOIA officers accountable. Like, phone calls are great. It's really good to be personable. Not every FOIA officer is chill like that, but we have found a lot around the state and around the country are. Like, they actually do want to try to get you what you want. And so the friendliness matters. The availability matters. And obviously that's not everyone, but always then take your notes and send it back to them for confirmation. Yeah. Sorry, lost the slideshow.
I think now is the point in the
Um,
slideshow when we were gonna talk through like specific FOIA questions.
Oh, yeah.
Or like questions based on the document we created.
Excellent. So we could talk through how to actually maybe fill this out, right? Because I'm thinking if I wanted to ask, I have a lot of family members and loved ones who have issues with video visits being canceled and video machines not working. Is there a way to phrase that, I guess, to say, how many times have video visits been offline where they've been denied or whatever? I mean, they have to have some type of record of that because they set them up. And I'm wondering if it's the DOC we FOIA or if we have to FOIA them first and get the contract with, I think it's Securus, but I'm not sure which one it is. GTL,
Yep.
it might.
Yeah, I've only used GTL.
Okay, yeah, GTL.
Yeah,
Securus is
so a private contractor will not be subject to FOIA, so you can't FOIA GTL directly, but you can definitely FOIA IDOC for that contract, and then you might see in there like how often they have to report it. You might look, I'm just saying how I would start sort of like problem solving. I would go and look for reports from other places that use GTL because it's obviously not just here. Has someone else found problems with the video calls? Are they reporting it? Like, some smaller jurisdictions might be reporting how many issues they have in some type of annual report. So again, that's when I would hit Google. I would try my keywords. I would look for other places that contract with them. And simultaneously, I would throw a quick one out to IDOC and just say, like, how many times over the last year, show me documents that show how many times over the last year video visits have been offline. And just say it how you know it or how someone has said it to you from IDOC, and see what they say back to you as you're doing your research to see what these documents, because I can imagine like a tech report coming out, so like just a technical problem log of how often they're like noting technical problems. It's also possible there's some type of like complaint log, like when users file complaints. I've definitely called them with like issues about phone calls. So they might
So
keep
I want to
that.
just follow up a little bit with that because it's kind of, I see that this DOC FOIA request at Illinois.gov, so it's the whole big boat, right?
Mhm.
And Illinois has facilities. So I just want to ask, would it be good to put, I want to know, for instance, at Dixon Correctional Center?
Mhm,
So to put that down, right? Versus,
mhm.
okay, thanks. And that's for,
Yes.
okay, cool.
Yeah, starting specific always helps a lot. The less work they have to do, the quicker they get back to you, usually.
You could even do the last like 5 years, last year. Um, yeah.
So we
Coming
could,
off
same thing with them denying visits, right? We could say, how many times have visits been turned away or denied or whatever at Illinois River Correctional Center?
Yeah, definitely. You can even ask for reasons. They might track those. I one time asked for some information about juvenile arrests for the Chicago Police Department, and they're called station adjustments, where they just like take the kids in and they do a little, like you're in trouble or you're not, and like get out of here. And the kids are always like, nothing happened, but actually something did happen. That is documentation on their record. So I asked, and then it turned out to get a whole spreadsheet of like, not just, I had to ask for like the age of the kid and whether or not the station adjustment was like formally or informally adjudicated. And I got age, race, gender, charge, whether it went through to prosecution or not, whether it went through on the record. So sometimes they're keeping like a lot of data, and it's worth just like asking for.
They
So I
also
would even ask
have,
like,
they might have like directives about visits and visit denials, even that outline like what their reporting process is. So that might say like, said person fills out this form, and then that'll let you know like, oh, so there's somebody documenting this in this way. I can request that document.
yeah, great question.
I don't want to hog it all up, so hopefully. I have a few more, but I know other people might.
I think it's really helpful just to get a sense of the types of information and documents that people are looking for, because for sure that helps me sort of expand my imagination about what might be out there. Yeah.
Well, I'm also going to say Restore Justice has been looking at a solitary confinement problems, and we've been working on a bill and really not gone too far. So I'm wondering if we can ask per facility how many times they use. What would you call it, Eric? Like, they have a word for it. They don't call it solitary.
Restrictive housing.
Yeah.
Is the term they've been using lately, but they are subject to change that at any time.
Okay.
It's what they do.
Yeah. So if you could just say like, how many times in Stateville in the past year have you used restrictive housing, and how many days, or I mean, you could ask them too, and how many days have people been in restrictive housing, right? Or do you have to know the person, or?
Yeah, typically with something like that, you typically will have to know the person, and maybe the person has to file the FOIA request either themselves or like give you permission to file the FOIA request, which is a super hassle with someone who is incarcerated. It's like such a wreck, but it is about snail mail and permission. Someone asked about the resumes and training and basically applications of police. In some areas you can get those, and in some areas you can't. I would just suggest asking and see what you get. A lot of times we ask for their application to see what they've filled out. Because a lot of times they're not attaching resumes and things like that, but say it all. An application, a resume, training experience. You can definitely ask for when officers have like attended training. So like give me a list of all the officers who are certified to use tasers, all the officers who have been through you know, like a community policing or like a mental health policing training. And then, oh, that's interesting. I've never asked about lockdowns. Anyone else?
No, but I'm sure there's like they have a lot of policy directives. And like they use really coded language, so they're kind of hard to understand like what they're even talking about. But I do think like something as big as IDOC, they like creating that sort of documentation. And oftentimes like that's a useful way to figure out the language that they're using to ask for it, if that's what you wanted. But I have to hop off and run to class, so I was going to drop my email in the chat. I just wanted to add a response to what some A to Z said, which is that like you can get all of this information and then it can be really frustrating because it's like you can advocate for it whether your loved one has an attorney or like online, or you can try to get a journalist, but sometimes there can feel like you're just getting all of this information, and that's really difficult because it just like validates what your loved one was probably already saying to you about their experience inside. And so I think like one useful avenue, I'm gonna plug like Restore, of course, and like helping funnel like FOIA requests into legislation that's happening, but also this is like totally a separate training of like thinking creatively about like how to use the information that you're getting and like how to advocate in different and creative ways when you are hitting a wall. But I mean, I definitely want to echo that like it is very frustrating when you get the data and still like no one cares. But I'm gonna hop off now, leaving you all in Chaclyn's hands and also like dropping my email.
Thank you so much for coming, Isra. Like you've been phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a shout out to Isra, who started with us when she was still in college and FOIA tons and tons of complaint records against police officers that we like still use to investigate 4 or 5 years later. So Isra is great. Yeah. Yeah, I would say sometimes these documents and data are just really helpful to attorneys. So I work with kids and when in Chicago, and when they get picked up and they get a public defender, a lot of times we'll go into our records and pull all the complaints of the officer who arrested them and give that to the public defender who might not have enough time, bandwidth, knowledge to like look that stuff up and find it publicly. And that often helps their case like a lot. You know, for someone to walk into court and be like, this officer has like 11 complaints from kids already. Sometimes you'll just see the case get dismissed quietly. And I think just like being prepared to help attorneys and policymakers by collecting some of this stuff, it works for us. Yeah, are you on the CPDP website? Is that on the chat? No, you can't FOIA the public defender's office. Typically, their files, the public defender's office files, are actually some of the most confidential that I've found. And with, you know, their hands are tied, I don't think the public defenders are really interested in, you know, cutting off this information, but they just are super restricted by law on that stuff. The best you can hope for on those is to just find out what they are and then go ask the correct agency. Like, sometimes the lawyer might help you understand, like, well, this is what's in the file, I can't give it to you, but this is where I got it from. But even that with the public defenders is really hard. The person who can get stuff from the public defender is the person who was being represented. They have a right to all of their stuff. So if there's some way to facilitate to help that person understand how to request that record, that's where you'll get it from. I should have said that initially. Yeah, that's a shout out to CPDP. I'm glad if anyone's used it. If you guys have feedback on CPDP, that's we built that site. We have a big team. But if you have any questions about it, feel free to shoot me an email. The CPDP is only updated through 2018 right now. So we just have like a nightmare of a time getting data from the Chicago Police Department. But within the next 2 months, it's going to go all the way to 2023. So we've just spent the last few years cleaning the data to rec, but you'll get a lot more updated profiles soon. So check it back out.
So in preparation for this, I looked through we have some on our Restore Justice Drive, some responses to FOIAs submitted in the past. And a lot of them were like, this is unduly burdensome. Do you have like tips for making requests specific enough that you don't get that response, but also still get what you want? How's your approach with that?
I guess my best approach really is just to like refine with the help of the FOIA officer. So really it is like, if you look at, the FOIA officer for the Chicago Police Department in my inbox, we have like hundreds of emails together. Like we might as well be coworkers sometimes. Cause like the one who I'm currently working with, like she is really helpful if she does try to track stuff down. I've worked with FOIA officers who are really like obstinate about things, and like you kind of just have to try to bully them a little bit, and just be the squeaky wheel. But if you can get a hold of a FOIA officer and make sort of a working relationship, that's the best way. You're really just kind of shooting around, feeling around for what I can. So CPDP technically goes back to 1967, which is the first year that complaint records against Chicago police existed. But really, realistically, like 2009, 2010 is when you start getting really good data. There's definitely stuff from like the 2000s that matters. A lot of those old, like a lot of the cops associated with John Burge, like their records are going to be really slim because they weren't being entered into a database. But like the more recent stuff with the Ronald Watts officers, those are definitely in there. It kind of depends. It is Chicago specific, although we recently built one for Champaign-Urbana. And it's a lot smaller. Obviously, smaller police departments handle data a lot differently. The URL for that is Champaign, like the city, .cpdp.co. And you'll see it's a lot simpler, less graphics, but all the use of force and complaint records that we have are there. And we're currently working on one for Joliet. This is also a time, I guess, to say we have a lot of data and records. We've been just like sort of, I don't want to say randomly, we do a lot of targeted FOIA campaigns, but we also just send tons of stuff out and are collecting it. And I have a big Dropbox file like full of different jurisdictions and stuff. So if you email something you're specifically looking at and I happen to have anything, I'll send it over to you. Yes, that's helpful. I know I keep saying it, but email.
Can I ask real quick about a question about the DOC FOIAs? Maybe you covered this and I just missed it or was reading something, but the FOIA officers for the DOC, like that department of the DOC, is it that they have a centralized answering like service for where all the requests come from? So it wouldn't really be more effective to say, like, if I had information I wanted to get from the DOC and I knew that they were going to be reluctant to give it to me, or I knew that like my filing FOIA request was met with a instant, like, we're not going to deal with that guy very much, would it be helpful to have other people file those requests from other parts of the state, say Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, aimed at the same information from the DOC, but just presumptively with other FOIA officers?
Yeah, that's a great thing. We split out FOIAs a lot so that they're not arguing with us about how much each FOIA request takes, how much time and stuff like that. We definitely split them out. We often, like, if we ever have interns, part of their process is like 2 to 5 FOIA requests a week. So you just like kind of keep stuff churning in. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so my understanding of the way it works technically is that when it comes in, like when the email comes in, it's automatically assigned to like a different FOIA officer. So you're gonna see some like rotating ones. This is very frustrating actually, because I have in the past asked for all the FOIA requests, or I have asked for, I tried this and I tried for a long time, it didn't work. Give me every document you've ever given to someone who requested it through FOIA. And I thought like, you know, you like already gave it to them. They were like, no, our email system is separate in each agent. We don't have to go through each email. So it's like centralized into one office, but you're going to end up with different FOIA officers depending on, you know, staffing and shifts and stuff like that.
Interesting. So, yeah, I don't know how much time we have left. A few more questions, maybe?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Okay.
The first good and pertinent FOIA request. I think that's a hard question for me to answer. It's in the chat. What would be a first good and pertinent FOIA request to help my loved one? If other people have answers or like documents they're curious about right off the bat, I always start with the police, because I just think there are a lot of like that moment, the arrest and the interaction is often the source of like the rest of everything. So I would look at complaint records about officers. You can get arrest records. So if you don't know the officer who arrested your loved one, you can ask for those. And then once you know the officer, you can start going after like complaints, and also uses of force by that officer, because they have to record every time a police officer uses force, and those look a lot like complaint records. Yeah. Do other people have ideas?
Well, I would just like to see everyone start with some accountability for some of the facilities, and that might be with visiting and for every single facility. We have everyone, okay, you do Dixon and you do, because there's like 30 of them. And that would be great to see. I mean, they have to have records of how many times they even deny visits. They have to have that in there because they know they denied them, or they closed the visiting room. And then we could ask reasons.
So, like I saw earlier in the chat that somebody had mentioned about the phone situation inside DOC facilities. It's a thing that is a problem that people who have loved ones in DOC facilities are definitely aware of. Would it be possible, do you think, like it's feasible to ask for, let's say, the number of work orders that were submitted to have the phones fixed? And like ask for the resolutions of those work orders? I worked in maintenance departments in the Department of Corrections while I was incarcerated, and I know there's a numbered work order system that they keep track of. Is that a thing that we could request in order to find that information of how long our phone's broken and that kind of stuff?
That's a great idea. Absolutely. Yeah.
So then presumably that being the case with phones, that would be a decent thing for anything that people would look at a facility that the Department of Correction handles and say like, oh, that thing is always broken there. How many work orders are there on this thing that's always broken, or something like that, for anything, right? I mean, it should apply equally across the board in that case.
Yeah. I have a hard time figuring out why they would deny that one. Sometimes with facilities like maps and like contracts about security, they'll say like for the safety of everyone, they can't release that stuff. But normally that excuse doesn't really fly.
That's very interesting. I would say that excuse flies very well for the Department of Corrections. They use it for everything. But that's been my experience with like grievances and stuff. So I'm hoping maybe FOIA requests, it's a little different, but yeah.
Yeah, I hear it. They're not great consequences to the government agencies that deny FOIAs incorrectly. And that's one of the reasons we always stress like communication with a FOIA officer, because it's really your best chance. Once you get to the public access counselor who you're appealing to, they can then instruct the agency to give you that stuff. But we've definitely had moments where we have one, they have instructed the police department to give us things. They instruct them once a week and we like still haven't gotten stuff. And the truth is they just never do. They technically have the ability to fine a department who doesn't comply. They don't really do that ever. Usually the only way to force them to do something is with a big lawsuit, and those are just kind of hard and expensive. So I don't know. It's not a great answer, but just kind of how it is.
It's the world we live in, not the one we wish we had. It's the world we live in, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. Any more questions, Lizzie? You see anything? Chris, Michael?
I had one other question. So our last loved ones self-advocacy training was about transfers in the Department of Corrections, and a question that came up several times was around the guidelines for how someone's incarcerated loved one could get transferred to a particular facility. And so like some of those guidelines are available on their website, and some of them just like aren't. And we had a really hard time getting a straight answer from them, I'll say, because they were like, well, your loved one would need to talk to their counselor, and their counselor will tell them whether or not they're eligible. But our thing is, if the counselor knows, then there's got to be like something written down somewhere to say who's eligible or not. Is that the kind of thing that you could FOIA in order to get that information and sort of advocate for your loved one?
Yeah, definitely. Any type of directives or process you should be able to get. We can also look on the IDOC publishes a ton of their directives, but again, like not the historical ones. So like if someone was denied a transfer in like 1992, you're going to want the directives that were in place at that point. But yeah, directives are something we always go for and pretty much always get because they just are public and they have them easily accessible. In terms of someone's personal record, I doubt you'd be able to get that. The person would have to ask for their own record.
But we could ask for the criteria for transfers.
Yeah, definitely.
They really do not share.
Yeah.
And I did actually ask them, and they kind of, oh yeah, maybe we could get that on the website.
Yeah, I would ask for anything like something that happens a lot is like an internal memo about how to interpret a directive, and you can get those. So my language is often like directives, internal memos, any directives about interpreting this directive, any addendums to the directive, like any rules that have been added internally to those. And then any administrative paperwork that shows how those are like entered into the system. I ask for all that stuff usually. It doesn't always exist, but it's good to have that context.
That's good. That's very good. I'm just wondering if someone did specifically want to know why they were denied or whatever the direct, they would have to they would have to FOIA it from inside.
Yeah,
Send them a form.
Yeah, you could send them a form. Definitely. You could fill it in probably and
Yeah.
and
Okay.
let them send it off. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Oh, I saw one just clicking. Well, not a question, but you're right about that. I'm going to share my screen again and do a couple of our closeout slides, but please feel free to continue putting questions in the chat if any come up. we just wanted to say our next steps, our call to action, is to take what we learned here today and submit a FOIA request. These were some of the questions we asked. But, you know, we'll send out the slides that they shared earlier, and there were a lot of great ideas in there as well. I also wanted to let you guys know that our next training in this series will be next month on June 25th. We'll be talking about Pell Grants and higher education. Julie, do you want to say anything more about this?
No, but I'm going to try to incorporate a FOIA request at the end of
There will be homework. And this is contact info for Julie herself and the wonderful Eric Anderson. I'll drop this in the chat as well, but thank you all so much for coming. And thank you so much, Chaclyn, for being here and for sharing your like vast expertise with us.
No, I really appreciate the chance to talk. The experience is not easy. It's a long process. I know. I'm really I'm just like impressed and inspired by all the families and friends who keep it going for people. So thanks for having me. Be sure to email me questions if you have them.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess